Hello, everyone. This is a sneak peek into our Fire and Earth class for the Butterfly Sanctuary that we are hosting this year, part of our 2026 artist residency called A Friendship That Can Withstand the Revolution. So, this video is part of our application portal for featured artists. And those are artists that we're looking for eight people to come through who are spiritual athletes, spiritual abolitionists, and artists who do not work for the industry because we work for the planet. So in this video is part of our application process, like I said. And so um, part of that is giving you a little sneak peek into what one of our classes looks like, which is the Fire and Earth class. And we also have a Water and Sky class. And so you can look at the full invitation to read about all those things. But in this video, I wanted to take you through a little sneak peek. So let me share my screen, and please don't mind my desktop. Oh, Lord. Okay. Um, this is not any less crazy, right? So the Fire and Earth class is the class where we focus on wealth building. And so part one of that class is a comprehensive study on my vision and design for a village raised artist grant ecosystem. And this is basically my foray into research into village funding, sovereign village funding models, and what can collective financial organizing strategies look like that are spiritually grounded and that unfold and weave into the emergence of grief-centered economies and economies that directly serve the life path of a spiritual abolitionist. And so on the Fire and Earth class, um, this is basically where I house my research. And I call this my Mad Spiritual Scientist board, if you're seeing this for the first time. Um, so I wanted to give you a little view of some of the things that we could talk about in in this class. And to ground that, I actually wanted to start over here. So welcome to Otherworldly Giants. That's my company and the small things. And this is basically, when I'm saying what I'm taking you on a comprehensive study over the next 8 months of the research I've done on sovereign village funding models, this is where we're going to come and play because it's literally an otherworldly amusement park. And there's games. But I want to start over here. This is something that I haven't yet talked about on YouTube if you follow me on YouTube. I want to talk about this little piece right here because, I've been saying this is a space for the spiritual abolitionist, right? And I mean, you could unpack for days really what that means. But I thought it was really important in this application portal to take a little time to share a little bit about where I'm coming from when I say that and what my translation is of an abolitionist ancestor healing journey, because, there are words that, lots of people say, and it can mean different things, um, depending on who's saying it. So I wanted to talk about what it means to me. And perhaps, one of the key points of of how I think about this life path. And this is where, for me, the life path of a spiritual abolitionist is about removing anti-blackness from the lineage. And in my experience, that's a soul's cry. It's a soul's cry first and foremost. It's a decision we make in our soul that, yeah, I'm going to come here and I'm going to do that. I'm going to remove anti-blackness from my own lineage. Um, and then we see all the things that that is tied to. And we do, I put removing anti-blackness in the middle for a reason, because when you dismantle this, all of these other things start to dismantle. You remove domestic violence, you remove religious violence and dogma, you remove ableism, you remove rape culture, you remove any kind of supremacy culture, right? So I wrote address white supremacy, male supremacy, caste supremacy, religious supremacy, and all the rest of it too. Remove witch hunting from the lineage. And so there's all these things that we're removing. And then whenever you go on a divestment journey, you have to invest in something, right? It has to be grounded in something that you are protecting, that you are choosing while you are actively not choosing. You're actively choosing to disconnect and divest yourself, and unravel yourself and unwind yourself from the rest of it. So, of course, in order to remove anti-blackness from the lineage, we must prioritize black feminism. We must restore indigenous leadership. And so I have all these things: queer, trans-centered, disability and economic justice, grief and heart-centered, survivor-centered, my love story with the universe. Um, and I put this up here. These are all promises that the earth made to herself that we are all accountable to. And that's really how I see uh, planet-centered, earth-centered, abolitionist spirituality that I chose on a soul level from day one before I even realized that I made that choice to live that way. Um, but really, it's about listening to the earth, and that's why this planet is also grounded in planet whispering, because I feel very strongly that in my conversations with the earth, this is her choice. She wants to remove anti-blackness from her body. She wants military violence gone. She wants dogma gone. She wants ableism gone. And as far as I'm concerned, if you're a human on the planet, whether you're on a spiritual journey or a political journey, these are all things that we are accountable to, whether we realize it or not, because this is the earth and her promises first and so and foremost, and this is her banishing spell, right? And so when we're talking about a spell, this is, and I use that word intentionally, not just to be cute. Because when you're putting a spell on something, you're undergoing a full-bodied transmutation process. It's a full-body transformation process, and actually more than the body, because it's about our relationship to the spirit world and our relationship to the earth. It's about things that are bigger than us channeling through us and giving things back to the earth that are bigger than us. And it's about bringing the spirit and bringing the earth into our creative process. And that's why, of course, we ground this whole artist residency and, what my company is about, and what my storytelling school is about. As artists, as storytellers, we create altars. Our stories are altars for ancestors to move and heal and evolve. Our stories are altars, and our creations are altars. Our businesses are altars of personal and planetary transmutation. So when you're committed to live this way on a spiritual abolitionist journey, um, you are undergoing that full body transmutation, and your stories do that too. And then we put those stories on this larger altar, or the collaboration between the earth and her altar is happening between our stories and what we set to transform through our work. And the thing is that when you live this way, the the sort of the full body transformation means that it's a lifelong journey, right? Of transforming yourself psychologically, um, economically, culturally, interpersonally, intimately, spiritually, ancestrally. Um, So this is, where we really have to be clear about our definition of what it really means to engage in liberation work when you're, you know, on this spiritual journey. it's not an intellectual exercise, right? It's not just about I understand what anti-blackness is and I'm not going to do it. It's about actually letting your full body change. And that's why our stories are so powerful because storytelling and stories, like what is a contraption that changes the world? A story does, right? So, um, yeah, let me just look at my notes. What did I write down? Yeah, we become agents of change. The full body transformation, it changes your fundamental relationship DNA. And that's a really common milestone and a common experience on this life path is that your relationship DNA changes. So it's heartbreaking because that changes your entire life. It changes your relationship with your family, with your friends, with partners, with lovers, with community, with work. And, most of us on this journey have had a lot of heartbreak, a lot of conflict, a lot of really like hard experiences, abuse even, um, while undergoing this kind of transformation. And when you do that on the ancestral level, there is a point where you talk differently, you move differently, you sing differently, you dance differently. And that's what we're really talking about in this ancestor dreaming apprenticeship. And that's who I want to kind of bring around me and into this apprenticeship. That's the spirit behind it, right? That's lighting my it's lighting my fire, right? In terms of the desire of why I want to do this in the first place, is I feel the way that my ancestors are dancing. And honestly, by going through the journey I have, at some point, I hit a place really deep in my own lineage that carries this medicine that hasn't been broken by colonization. And I found it really deep within my body, not just by going back in time, but by going inside of me, inside of time. And so I found this way of expressing, of moving, of visioning, of listening. And all of this research is what poured out of that moment of hitting that place of like, yeah, we're here, we're here. And so I'm really interested in bringing together a group of people who are like, yeah, our ancestors are dancing together, they're collaborating together, they're dreaming together. There's all these different multiverse ways that we're weaving. And so then centrally, what I want to say about all of this in sort of talking about like this is not just a solely intellectual exercise because we want to acknowledge that these are spiritual bodies of knowledge when we're saying survivor scholarship, grief scholarship, Black feminism, Indigenous feminism, disability justice, uh, erotic sex worker feminism, right? These are all spiritual bodies of knowledge and they're alive. So that's the point I wanted to make here about how I think about the work of a spiritual abolitionist is that, you know, capitalism and academia and all these things, they teach us that wisdom is just a thing. It's just a lifeless thing out there somewhere in the mind, right? And that it's, all we need to do is take from it. We just extract from it and we learn. But here we're saying these are spiritual bodies of knowledge and they are alive. All of these things are made of living ancestors. They were people once, and they are still alive in the spirit realm, and they're still in constant evolution. And they're made of the animism of nature. They're made of water. They're made of trees. They're made of stones. They're made of stars and sky. They're made of all these alive things in the world and in the cosmos. And they all have energy and they all have the ability to communicate with us in their specific languages. And what I said here. They have hearts and lives of their own. They're sovereign. They move, they evolve, they change their minds. They need our relationship and our reciprocity, not just you're here, this body of wisdom for me to take from and tell people what I learn, right? And so that's really how we want to think about the bodies of wisdom, or at least that's how I'm thinking about bodies of wisdom and development when I'm talking about it. I'm talking about worlds that are alive and that we are in relationship to them when we steward and take care and grow these gardens. Um, so I won't get too far into breaking all this down, but see, a lot of us on this life path, we have experiences with either spiritual culture or activist culture, that didn't really understand that these are spiritual bodies that are alive. And that is, the ways that white supremacy and all the other things have infiltrated, both spaces, and intentionally so, kind of pitted these things against one another, spirituality and activism, or spiritual, healing and movement work. And so a lot of us, in the spiritual journey, we're like, I have a spiritual calling, and so we look for teachers and we do all that. And we have a lot of heartbreaking experiences there, or it's the other way around. It's you're a healer and you're having a lot of heartbreaking experiences in activist community, liberation community. And there's this, that's too negative to talk about political stuff in the spiritual world. And there's we don't have time for that, when we're talking about healing and art and storytelling, right? Um, and the interesting thing about both of those statements is that they're actually in agreement with each other, while they're in a disagreement, about, what's important and what isn't. They're actually in agreement in saying they both agree that these bodies of wisdom are not spiritual, ancestrally alive bodies of knowledge that must be prioritized in the foundation of our movements and practices. Because when you say that's too negative, whether it's, Black feminism, or, what's going on in Palestine or Sudan or Congo, or talking about genocide, or even saying the word genocide, spiritual, like, oh, don't, it's too negative. You're saying that those things aren't part of our spirituality. It's not an alive part of spirituality, while we see a lot of other things as spiritually alive. And, on the other side, we're saying, oh, if we don't have time for that, we're saying that that when we engage in something like ableism, or disability justice, when we engage in something like, I don't know, um, feminism, or, talking about misogyny and patriarchy, we're saying those aren't alive bodies of wisdom, right? They don't have a spirit. Because if they did, we would need to have time for that in our activist politic, right? And so it's interesting that they both agree about that. And, in a classroom, I would probably want to, go into a more complex and nuanced place here and break down, that's too negative and we don't have time for that, because they're actually truths. There are some things that are true in those sentences, right? And there are also lies in those sentences. And so this is a place where, as a group, we can unpack those statements, with greater nuance. Um, but here is, where those of us who live in the gaps here, that are rising through the gaps here with our leadership, um, are so important. Because if a spiritual movement isn't grounded, it eventually collapses on itself. And if an activist movement isn't grounded, it'll constantly loop around in circles, searching for what is missing. And if we don't ground in this idea that these works, these wisdoms are alive, then we're not grounded. And if a movement isn't grounded, it becomes unwilling to undo its problems from its foundation. But if you're unwilling to undo its problems from its foundation, you eventually become unwilling as a whole. And so that creates all these things, self-sabotage, the movement sabotages itself, lack of responsibility, over-responsibility, deceit, dishonesty, hiding, hoarding. So all these things, um, all these things that a movement becomes. And so in the fire and earth class is really, about a very comprehensive, nuanced, complex study of like what are the thriving village protocols? What are the abolitionist relationship values? What are the spiritual technologies? What is the spiritual work required? So here is where we look at, this is something that you could, talk about for a couple hours probably with a small group, right? Even just like really pulling out the stories that you have that come along with this, and what it's bringing up in you and what it's making you think about and where is it taking us, right? If these are the things, the constant sort of patterns that we see in ourselves and in movements, um, what are actually the abolitionist relationship approaches and values that are rising from that gap and that make an intervention and that create miracles? And the other thing that I wanted to say just in the sneak peek is, when you are this kind of creator that knows what you are carrying is alive, and I think that's really where I wanted to bring it just for this little video, is just one of the core desires that I have, to bring people together as a circle of featured artists because I've always been that, even when I didn't realize that's why it was so important to me. When I have a project that I'm working on, when I have a vision, when I have a story that I'm trying to bring to life, I have always inherently known that what I'm carrying is alive, right? And it's, this is who this circle is for creators who know that, what you're carrying is alive and it's probably connected to very personal experiences in the way that your grief is alive, in the way that the love is alive, the reason why you're doing it in the first place, the relationships, the beloved companions that you do this with and for, they're alive. And there, just by looking at this map, we see all the ways that, um, it's so common. It's actually by design that we keep having, uh, experiences of being antagonized and neglected and, you know, um, or just, misunderstood or not finding the right kind of support for the way that we create. A lot of it is because you are carrying something that is alive and that is meant to bring change, major change. And how do people react to change, right? Especially when we don't have an ecosystem that is designed to support the process of change. And that's what this whole big system that I'm carrying, the research is about, that the heart of it is, well, what if we had a collective financial organizing strategy that then built cultures, that then, built really strong relationship habits of really resourcing change and all that is alive, that is meant to bring about change in ourselves and in our work. And so that's really who I want in this container are people who are like, already I'm that kind of creator that, I protect what I'm creating as if it is alive because it is. And that puts me in a particular kind of danger in a lot of situations. And so that's why the protocol for the water and sky class is to protect what is alive enough to bring about change. And then the protocol for the fire and earth class is to protect the human behind the work. So I really wanted a creative space for people who are like, I know what a mama bear you are because I am that way too. And I want that, that there is that first class that's really about like this is about protecting the work. This is about protecting what is alive in you that you're raising. And so that's why we focus a lot on the peer support focuses on all that kind of stuff around creative development and the spiritual development stuff and all the things that, I put down in the invitation that we look at your time to come to a peer support circle and just get support for whatever it is coming up in your process, knowing that this is a place that is designed to protect the person who protects the work the way that you do. And that's why in the Fire and Earth class, we really focus on wealth building because the work is not more important than the human behind the work. And that also puts us, in a hard position in many places. Because when you are that kind of creator that is so protective of something you are raising that is alive, people will take advantage of you and take advantage of your generosity. And we still have a lot of work to do culturally and collectively to transmute this thing that we think, that creators should always put themselves, you know, um, second behind the work, behind the movement, behind the project. But we're really saying here, this is a time that we also have to really prioritize your livelihood, your well-being, your monetary success, and both personal and collective ecosystems of financial thriving and wealth in all its forms. So we really look at, that's why we really look at the wealth building piece in the second class, um, to protect the human behind the work. So yeah, that's the heart of the points that I wanted to make in this video. And otherwise, throughout the 8 months, I'm basically at a point where I want to see what the group has to say and what the group is excited to look at. I obviously have so much research that I've done and that I could take you on any number of adventures. And so I really want to hear, like what are people excited about? What would be helpful? What do you want to learn about? What do you want to talk about? So I'll be, it's an interactive thing throughout the whole journey. But just to give you a little tour of some places we could go. This is what I like to call the, bad business bitch section. So if we're really looking at, well, how would a business run in an earth honoring economy, in a grief centered economy? And so there's all these things we could talk about, how your business stays active, how it stays funded, how it gives back, how it stays running, and internal systems. This is a moment where I was like, whoa, these are all different things. How your business stays running is different than how it stays active, than how it stays funded. And so let's break all that down. Over here is really fun. We're breaking down all this difference between marketing, promotion, advertising, outreach, all for Earth-centered economies. Um, where else? This place was fun. I did a whole like money making audit of all the different ways that we currently move money. And there's a lot of X's. Um, and then there's this whole thing, which I like to say it's either like go-kart racing or it's the lounging river. So there's like a slow way that this whole thing moves, and then there's like the speedy way. But when I break this down, this is like, we did an audit over here, but this is where I'm talking about bringing forth thriving village practices around moving money and inspiring people that way. Um, versus kind of just falling back on old patterns. And so that this is one version of that we can look at. Here's another one. Today for you, tomorrow for me. That's a very simple protocol around sacred reciprocity from my spiritual practice. And so, what would a money moving workshop look like around this? What would, a 3 year habit, going on what would it look like to imagine 3 years of moving money for alongside this protocol? Or through this protocol of sacred reciprocity. And what would that look like for 3 years if a village just did that? Or if a small group just did that? So those are kinds of things that we could talk about just on the money side of things. And on the creative side, this is the water park. And this is where I really like to have fun. Like I like to say when I go, I haven't been to an amusement park in a long time, but usually when I go, at least since I became an adult, I'm like, I would just like to stay in the water park the whole time. That's fun for me. That's where I live. And the water park over here is where we look at all these different parts of organizing your practice creatively when you are this multi-faceted, multi-dimensional kind of creator, where you have like a coaching service over here, and you have a play that you're writing over here, and you have a visual, art series over there. This is really where we start mapping out on an altar. How do I organize my practice, whether it's the production or dissemination of it or just the daily practice of it. And so these are like tools, frameworks, philosophies to look at on any part of the creative process, any season of development. Um, and we also look at, there's this part over here, for example, all these pieces of writing that I've done are looking at different parts of storytelling craft, different roles in, say, a film or a book project or a play, and how they relate to a thriving village roles. How the, who was the director in the village, who was the dramaturg in the village. And so these are the ways that we bring artistic craft down to its village roots and down back to the artistic traditions that they come from, and kind of collaborating, with that in our modern day context. What would that look like today? And that's really where we start to see how, um, the press tour, the final cut, the crafting, the coverage, like what was that in the village? Because nerding out about all these things is how we start to really see what the building blocks of, village marketplaces and village-centered economies can look like. Um, yeah, and then over here, I wanted to show you this part quickly. This is where I'm like, well, if we're talking about grief-centered economies, what the heck is an economy anyway? A set of village practices as determined by an altar. We think of an economy often just about like the money part of it, and sometimes like the social economic part of it. But actually, there's a whole spiritual nervous system to economies. There's the mental nervous system, there's the physical body, and the emotional nervous system. And so, if we're looking at how a capitalist economy works on an altar versus an economy for the planet, let's break that down and see what comes out of that. So there's a lot that we can talk about there, including Elsa. Yeah, and then here is one of my favorite places. This is, what happens, what is possible when a ecosystem like this, a village artist grant ecosystem, is functioning at its optimal level. And here's where I mapped out, well, what would a successful arms embargo look like um, on an altar? Okay? Because, often we think about arms embargo as just about, again, you know, blocking blocking the weapons from going, physically human chains, like all that kind of stuff. But what would happen if we organized a full-bodied arms embargo that includes the ritual and the ceremonial element of it, the looking at the long-term ancestral divestment and spiritual divestment, looking at popular education, communal gatherings, looking at um, the nervous system part of it, spiritual roots of a filibuster. So I mapped out this whole thing of like what that could look like, along with a funding system that is designed to keep movements like this going. Because if we don't have a funding system that is directly for an act like that, it can't be sustainable. And so this is one part where, we can get really excited to see the big, longer pictures, the bigger pictures involved with investing in the small seeds of an economy like this at this stage. Um, yeah, and so I'm really excited to go wherever we want to go as a group in terms of looking at whatever it is that you want to talk about that's on this board. And so that's definitely going to be a collaborative experience as we go on. Yeah, I'll stop it here for now and I'll see you in the rest of the application. And if you're watching on YouTube, just check out all the links below. Okay, see you next time.